I'm Lisa Fletcher, and you're in the stream. Today, India's online crackdown. Hundreds of websites blocked, Twitter accounts disabled. The government says it's to contain ethnic violence and protect the security of the nation. But critics are crying censorship. Anusha Hossain is back and filling in for Malika, who's covering the Republican National Convention all week. Anusha, I was looking at the tweets. A lot of our community in India is reminding everyone that this isn't the first time this has happened.
Exactly. Our community has a lot to say about this issue, and they're pointing out to us a lot of things that we have to talk about, from ethnic tensions to national security to web censorship. I'm going to be pulling up your tweets throughout the show. If you at home, our online community, want to join us, please tweet me using the hashtag @AJStream.
And joining us in the studio is Sadanand Dume. He's resident fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, where he writes about South Asian political economy, foreign policy, business, and society, with a focus on India and Pakistan. Sadanand, welcome back to the stream.
Great to be back.
Remember, you can stay in touch with the stream on a number of social media sites. Follow us on Twitter at AJStream, where you can tell us what stories matter to you. And speaking of what matters to you, here are some of the hashtags you're following. And before we get into the show, I just want to warn you that some of the images that we're going to be showing today are a little bit graphic. More people have been killed in recent clashes across India's northeastern state of Assam as paramilitary troops and the army increase their patrols. Now, the prolonged conflict between the indigenous Bodo tribe and Muslims reignited on July 19th, leaving about 90 people dead and forcing 400,000 to flee from their homes. The Bodo community believes Muslims are illegal settlers from Bangladesh who are after power and land. Muslims, however, claim that they are discriminated against by the Bodos. As word of the clashes spread to the rest of the country, SMSs, tweets, and websites began warning of Muslim reprisal attacks against northeastern migrants. Fueling tensions even further, doctored images depicting attacks on those in Assam went viral. Fearing for their lives, more than 30,000 panicked. Northeastern workers and students began a mass exodus from major cities like Bangalore and Mumbai. People crammed onto overcrowded trains and headed back to their home states. The government's answer was to block more than 300 websites, including certain Al Jazeera pages, disable numerous Twitter accounts, and to temporarily limit the number of bulk SMSs that individuals could send, all in the hopes of subduing simmering tensions. But was this action appropriate, or is this an infringement on certain rights? Joining us from New Delhi via Skype is Pavan Duggal, president of India's first ever cyber law consultancy, cyberlaws.net. He's also advised India's Ministry of Communication and Information Technology. Also with us from New Delhi is Sanjoy Hazarika, director at the National Center for Northeast Studies. He's written extensively on the Northeast and produced numerous documentary films about the region. Welcome to the stream, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Now, I do want to mention before we get started, we did reach out to the Indian government on numerous occasions looking for a representative to come on the program, but we received no response. And Pavun, I want to start with you. Given the history of ethnic tensions and violence in the Northeast, were the government's actions justified, or is India beginning its slide down that slippery slope of censorship?
Let me begin by, first of all, disagreeing with what was stated in the early part of your program. We need to understand that America and India are not equal in terms of their appropriate jurisprudence, and clearly laws have developed in different directions. While America is governed by the First Amendment, India is governed by the Constitution of India, and the Constitution of India, though makes the fundamental right to freedom of speech and expression fundamental to all citizens, it's not an absolute right, and it's subject to certain reasonable restrictions. Now, there are some messages that's coming across that India is going the China way. Nothing like that is happening. Please understand, this is for the first time in the history of the internet that an attack has been mounted upon a nation. This is no longer just rumor mongering attack. This is a systematic cyber war that's engaged against India. And when you look at it in contrast with the Middle East Arab Spring Revolution, there is remarkable differences between both these incidents. The Arab Spring was primarily aimed at propagating the will and the aspirations of the people. But here, the focus was to divide, to create mass hysteria, and to create mass terror in the minds of the people, all aimed to prejudicially impact the security, sovereignty, integrity, or defense of India. Clearly, it's not just cyber terrorism and mobile terrorism at its classical best. It is also a case of cyber war against India. Now, once this kind of an event is going to hit any nation is going to go into a defense mechanism. India has also gone in that regard. Of course, the banning or blocking of 300 odd websites is a matter of record. I personally believe that blocking does not serve any purpose in today's context, given the architecture of the internet. But these are one of the few tools that are currently available with any sovereign nation.
Okay.
The fact remains that a lot of work still needs to be done in India, and India is just trying to find out how to respond to such a scenario. There is no such any censorship of media. There is no censorship of social media. There is no censorship of internet per se in India.
Okay, boy, we've got a lot to cover here based on what you've said, Pavan and Sadanand. I want to go to you. Systematic cyber war, cyber terrorism. Is this a bit of an overstatement?
Yes, I think it's an understatement to call it a bit of an overstatement. It's a huge overstatement. I think that these are very loaded terms, and I think that obviously all countries have legitimate national security interests, but when you make such a charge, that is broad and has international implications and also, of course, profound domestic implications, the onus is always on the government to provide evidence. From what we've seen of the sites blocked, from what we've seen so far, there is no credible evidence that I've seen, and I've been following this quite closely, to suggest that this was anything approaching a cyber war against India. What this is people taking advantage of a fraught situation to spread rumors. Unfortunately, that exists in every society, that exists in India too. And to pretend that this is all part of some large, giant conspiracy from across the border is really a way of avoiding having the painful conversations that people need to have.
There has been some suggestion that this is a diversionary tactic on the part of the government to take pressure off of them for not being able to properly deal with violence in Assam.
Yes, and it's also something that obviously when you say your country is at war or your country is being attacked, obviously there's a tendency for people to then give the government the benefit of the doubt rather than to scrutinize why are they blocking, what are they blocking, does it make sense what they've blocked, are there political reasons behind that, are they trying to use this as a diversionary tactic. And I think that when you sort of, it's very irresponsible because there are serious problems. There are serious issues of terrorism, for example, that India faces, but the government should be careful about what it labels in that category and what it doesn't.
That's interesting. I actually want to pull up on that theme of the internet being what kind of a platform it is for the average person. And I have a tweet here from Abid Shafi who says, "Internet is a platform of propagation. Real concern remains rumor. Government of India needs to censor word of mouth." I also have a tweet here from Razer78. He said that it was no emergency, only stupidity, as one prominent journalist who was also blocked said. So would you agree with that? Do you think that people kind of overreacted and there was just a lot of word of mouth and a lot of misinformation spreading about what was going on?
The situation itself was obviously alarming. I think that most of it, the vast majority of it, in terms of the rumors, are things that would have been used, were text messages. You've got to understand there are only 100 million Indians who use the internet at all. Mm-hmm. Only 50 million Indians have Facebook accounts. Only 16 million Indians, that is less than 2% of the population, mm-hmm. is on Twitter. So to sort of to imagine that this whole thing is being propagated by social media is delusional. It's being propagated by phone, it's being propagated by organized groups, and there is an element of real intimidation that's taking place. And the real issue is how do you reassure all Indian citizens, whether they're Northeasterners, whether they're Muslims, whether they're Hindus or whoever, that law and order will be maintained and that you will be safe and you don't need to flee. That's the real question. The question is really not. I mean, this is a classic diversion to turn this into a debate about Twitter and Facebook.
And Sanjoy, I want to bring you in here because Sadanand raises an excellent point, which is how do you assure Northeasterners, a group of people that have been discriminated against for years, that have been embroiled in violence for years, and frankly, many of whom say they do not trust the government's ability to protect them or keep them safe. How do you assure them when something like this happens that the government can handle it?
Well, the first thing is for the government itself not to give in to panic attacks, because I think, as Sadanand said right at the beginning, a very ham-handed approach does not create confidence in the public. And you can't fool people all the time, especially in these days of instant technology. I think that as far as assuring people is concerned, I mean, the signals from the government, certainly at the various states, were completely at divergence with what they should have done. For instance, government in the state of Karnataka said they will provide trains for people to leave. Now, the government and its minions should have been camping at the railway stations to ensure that people don't leave, to persuade them, to convince them that this is not a situation which warrants the kind of extreme measures that they were taking. But clearly the people didn't have the kind of faith that they should have in the government, partly because there is still in these areas where they live, where they have settled, there is at that level probably a sense of not belonging, of not feeling part of a larger society, of being protected. Now, this is not true of all over the country. It's happened in a few pockets, and it so happens, and you should know this, that a vast majority of those who migrated from Assam and live and work in different parts of India stayed on. It's only 30,000 out of many hundreds of thousands who went back. It is a large number, but it's important to recognize the other truth.
Sadanand, I want to go back to you for a second, and I have a tweet here from our online community who's saying, from Tabazim, in a communally sensitive country like India, hate on social media can stoke violence. I have another tweet here from the Brown Brumby who says, SM, social media certainly contributed to rumors. Terms like ethnic cleansing were used to describe the situation in Bangalore. So you were saying earlier, and I really liked how you put that in context, that 16 million people in a country like India that has over 1 billion people in its population are on social media. But here it's saying that social media did play a role. It wasn't just, the SMSs that are being sent. So even if it's a small number of the population that is actually on social media, it did have an impact, correct?
Well, I'd like to see evidence for that, right? So I'd like to see, do we have evidence for that? The odds are, if you are someone who is using Twitter in India, you're among the most educated and the most well-off. I don't think there's any evidence to suggest that you're one of those people who is, intimidating a group of people from the Northeast and so on. Is there hateful stuff on social media? Plenty of it. Is there bigotry on social media? Plenty of it. Do people say all kinds of things, unkind, uncharitable, hostile things about other communities? Yes. And the way to deal with that is to discuss it, to keep it. I think sunlight is always the best disinfectant. You cannot have the government coming in and deciding what is appropriate and what is not appropriate. If someone sends you a hate tweet, block the person. If you think someone is being irresponsible, report them. There are many ways to deal with this. The worst way to deal with this is to get the government or sort of concerned citizens to kind of sit in on judgment and decide for you and me what is appropriate speech and what is not.
Pavan, Sadanand raises an excellent point. I want you to respond to that. Who's the arbiter of what is acceptable speech, what is insightful speech, and what's okay?
First and foremost, let me begin by disagreeing with this approach of looking at the entire situation in India from American viewpoints and American eyesights. You have to understand this is a different ball game altogether, and for passing quality judgments without having any authoritative basis to do so is just talking in thin air. I would like to tell you that, you see, at the end of the day, in India, we actually saw events happening. It was, if something small happens in America, it creates a big trigger. In India, 30,000 people move away. for the first time, the biggest kind of migrations we've seen after independence. Now that's huge enough, sure. I completely agree with the thought process. It's not just social media, it's a combination of social media as also misuse of mobile networks. But the fact remains that this was a kind of an emergency that took place. I would call it a mobile kind of an emergency, a cyber emergency, and therefore appropriate mechanisms have to be built up. Surely the government cannot be a mute spectator to let communal rights happen and then say, okay, let the people decide, let them block. Let me tell you, it's good to deliver judgments from your perspective, but the reality is social media websites are extremely slow to react to any abuse mechanisms located from India. It's common knowledge that in India, the Twitters and the Facebooks of the world invariably are very, very slow to respond to. So much so that even legitimate requests for blocking of our stuff to put down which is in violation of the law is not routinely adhered to. This is despite the fact that these social media companies are intermediaries under Indian law, and the Indian IT law is very, very clear. Whether you are located in India or not, the moment your services are impacting or are available on computers, computer systems and computer networks that are physically located in India, you will need to comply with Indian law. What we have currently seen is a distinct hesitancy on the part of these American companies to comply with Indian law. Now it's amazing how they are immediately able to comply with normal legitimate requests in America, but when it comes to legitimate requests either from a sovereign nation like India or from people of India, it takes such a long period of time on the ground that we require time, we do not have technical handles, we do not know the way. Well, at the end of the day, you have to realize that if your services are being made available to billions and millions of people on the internet or on mobile platforms on the Indian ecosystem, you will be needing to comply with law. And what we have currently found is a distinct hesitancy to comply. And
Got it.
because had these social media websites been far more proactive and responsive at least to the request of a legitimate government. Please understand there are two kinds of situations.
Okay, we understand the point, Pavan. I want to get back over to Anusha, though. She's got some other comments from our community.
Okay, I want to pull in our online community here for a second. I have a tweet here from Faith Matters UK who says, action by Indian government and overreaction to the situation. The same media sources can be used to ensure calm in such situations. So, Pavan, I want to pose this question to you. Would you agree with that? Would you agree that the same tools have kind of been used to, make this issue a big deal, can also be used to make everybody, stay calm?
Please understand, there are always two sides of the same coin, the positive side and the negative side. And while these tools, what have the tools been used? What has the Indian government said? Please lock down certain content, at least, or disable access of them in India at the time when this kind of an information is not warranted, because it's likely prejudicially impact public calm and public order. Now, there's nothing wrong in that. You can always pass any kind of value judgments because you're sitting not in that jurisdiction. You are not alive to the cultural nuances and sensibilities of the concerned culture and the people. But the fact remains, yes, if you are going to give a lot of power, which is without any kind of appropriate checks and balances, potentiality of abuse could potentially happen in the times to come. But the fact remains that in uneven situations, in situations of emergency, well, let's look at the American example. After the 9/11, a country which sweared by the cause of privacy was ready and willing to set apart a portion of its privacy and civil liberties so long as they got a secure America. I do not see if there's a replication of this kind of an approach in other parts of the world, there should be any kind of noise made about it.
Sadanand, is this true? Are we taking too much of a Western viewpoint here and not understanding the Indian culture, the idiosyncrasies and the norms there?
No, I think that's a completely false argument. I think that first of all, if you look at the vast majority of people on Twitter, they don't trust the government to censor them fairly. They don't trust the government to do this right. That's been the overwhelming sense on Twitter and on Facebook. And so the notion that there's some great Indian appeal out there that we are ignoring, frankly, does not square with the facts. Secondly, look at the actual sites that the government censored. Surreptitiously, it didn't tell people, but then an enterprising reporter broke the story. They censored news pages, Al Jazeera's website, the Telegraph's website. These are serious mainstream publications. They censored a blog page from Pakistan that was debunking rumors. So this poor guy sets up this page where he says, hey, look, here's how these images are being misused. Don't fall for the rumors. Here's the reality. And the Indian government blocks his page. So let's be realistic. The whole thing was done in an extremely ham-handed way. It was done without any intelligence. It was done apparently to show that something was being done. And it really sort of shows how when you have these kinds of powers, they tend to be abused.
Sanjoy, I know you want to jump in here. Please go ahead.
Yeah, there are 2 points I want to make. One is that the Sadanand's point about the limitations of the impact of social media and the extension of those networks is well taken. But I must say that it is basically the mainstream media which picks up the social media, these issues, these networks, these concerns, and throws them out into the public space. If you just had the social networks by themselves, the social media themselves, they wouldn't have had much impact. It's just that all the other media like yours, television channels across the country picked them up and ran with the story. I think that was one thing that really caught everybody's attention. And I think that the other thing is the government's ham-handedness, which was on display a few days ago in a similar program, stems from the fact that it acts in a knee-jerk manner. And it works on the dictates of the Ministry of Home Affairs, which is essentially the ministry that governs the law and order, the security situation in the country. And I think that there is a lot to be said here for opportunities of dialogue. If you are really concerned about these issues, you think that hate being spread by word and not by action is as critical as anything else, then surely you need to dialogue with the media, the networking side.
Sanjoy, on that point, I'm going to have to stop you, but we're going to pick this up in our online post show, so please hold that thought. Thanks to all of our guests. The stream's digital producer, Malika Bilal, is reporting this week from the Republican National Convention in Florida, and today we want to get to her because she takes a look at a group of people who aren't allowed inside the convention walls, but they're using technology to make sure their voices are heard.
Political conventions in the U.S. are marked as much by speeches from party officials as they are by the protests that happen outside of them. We're standing now in the Occupy encampment on the sidelines of the Republican National Convention here in Tampa, Florida, where, as you can see, we're suffering the effects of Tropical Storm Isaac. Now, we reached here after following a protest called March on the RNC, where protesters were out voicing their opinion on the Republican Party's platform on things from abortion and women's rights to immigration and the wars overseas. One of the things we noticed was a proliferation of protesters and citizen journalists holding up their smartphones, broadcasting the events for the world to see. Now, we spoke to some of those live streamers, and this is what they had to say.
The more angles you get on a story, the more the truth comes out. It's all about, because no matter who you are or how you report, you're going to have bias in there. So being able to cross-check stories with other stories, independent versus mainstream even, is a really good way to, I guess, get the truth out, get a bigger picture. Every camera that's out there is putting the story together piece by piece.
We see a lot of press here, a lot of mainstream press, a lot of independent press. There's absolutely a role for, live streamers and myself. It's, what I'm presenting is sort of a specialized coverage that people want to watch.
And of course, you can find all of those live feeds on Twitter. There's a tweet here from Global Rev Live that says, Tampa police forcing RNC protesters to move through a cemetery, with a link to their live stream. Back to you, Lisa.
All right, the Post Show is next. It's streamed on aljazeera.com. Now, on Wednesday, we look at the importance of Christianity in the U.S. presidential elections. Our team in Tampa will be coordinating a Google Hangout on the role of religion in U.S. politics. So tweet us your thoughts on that topic. Just use the hashtag AJStream. Until then, we'll see you online and be there for the Post Show. Starts in 10 seconds. Welcome back to the Streams Post Show. We're continuing our discussion on India's online crackdown. With us in the studio is Sadanand Dume with the American Enterprise Institute. Sadanand, I saw a lot of tweets headed my direction today that people were complaining about the media in India sort of being in bed with the government and questioning why would they be pro-censorship of all people. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, I think that there's a strong sense among many people on Twitter, they like using this hashtag called paid media. I don't really sort of buy that view. I don't necessarily buy the view that everything is being done out of malign intent. I do think that there's been a sort of tendency, well-intentioned, mind you, to sort of pussyfoot around some of these sensitive issues. And I think it comes from essentially a good place because these are people who broadly stand for secular liberal values. I happen to think it's the wrong approach. I think that you are much better off achieving those values if you're able to talk about unpleasant things instead of trying to cover them up. And I think that there's a sense where people on the internet feel that because there's this tendency to pussyfoot around things, that what they're getting is not the truth. They're not being given the truth and told, well, you make up your own minds. They're being given a kind of massaged version, and there's a sort of lot of anger about that.
It's really interesting that you said that. I'm going to go over to our online community here for a second. I have a tweet from Shilpa Tiwari, 10% national security, 90% censorship. We don't see a way out right now. The government is supported by our media. I also have a tweet here from @IndianThoughts who says, I can't access AJ Stream. They have blocked it.
No.
And she's actually included a screenshot of the block. So it's really interesting. It goes with what you were saying earlier about the media being in bed with the government, and also the fact that AG Stream has blocked itself.
It's ironic. I'd like to see Mr. Duggal answer this, right? So presumably our discussion has been creating a national security threat for India, according to this.
Pavan, you want to jump in on that one?
Yes.
Yeah. Let me begin by saying this program is no threat to national security of India.
Thank you for clarifying.
Well, let's face it. Well, there have been some faux pas. A lot of these pages from Al Jazeera have been blocked, which I personally see have no connection to national security. That's fine. But let's look at the other side of it. Yesterday and day before, the Prime Minister of India, through the Prime Minister's office, was tweeting all day long about the defense of the Indian Prime Minister in a controversy pertaining to allocation of coal mines in India. Now, this is yet a classical instance. If you're talking about Indian government trying to censor social media or censor internet, how is it in Prime Minister's office goes tweet long in defense of the Prime Minister? So here, we have a nation where different kind of trends are emerging. Definitely not censorship, because I have been here. I have not seen any kind of the Indian media going to bed with the government. A lot of people have gone up and taken very strong positions as well. But the fact remains, broadly speaking, what I'm seeing historically over the last 10 days or so, the trend is emerging. The trend is emerging within the Indian mindset and the Indian citizens that in case if it's going to be having any impact upon the sovereignty, integrity, security of India, then Indians won't mind backing the government, would right now not go ahead nitpicking. And so much so, as you were talking just a couple of hours back, there is some news on the Indian media that the Indian government is now out to appoint a new cybersecurity officer. So I think it's a huge nation. It's a nation of unity and diversity, and we have many, many different kinds of trends emerging.
Sanjoy, I want to jump over to you for a second. Pavan had just mentioned the excellent tweeting abilities of the Indian government, which raises the question, why didn't they use the same mechanism by which the rumors were disseminated to debunk them when all of this was going on?
Do you know how governments work in most parts of the world? It says if they have a problem, they'll say, oh my God, we have a problem. How do we solve this? They never think ahead. Everything is ad hoc. I mean, Pawan will tell you that. And the fact that you guys try to get in touch with various government spokesmen ensured that they will block you. It's basically how it works. But I think it's very important in all this also to understand that the ground realities are very different to what often appears on television or even what the government says. I mean, take for instance this issue of the Prime Minister's office tweeting away. Well, They tried to close down sites which parodied the Prime Minister's office, the PM oath. So they lack a sense of humor, apart from a sense of efficiency. I mean, that probably is true of most governments. So I think we should take governments perhaps at some times less seriously and our work more.
I want to go to our online community here for a second. I have a tweet from Al Gandhi who says, government of India blocks. Was Northeast people exodus and rumors just a pretext or excuse to ban some accounts, as we've seen AJ Stream included? I also have a video question comment here from our online community. Let's take a listen.
Hi, my name is Samir Khan. I'm from Pune, India. And my question is that recent controversy about the exodus of Northeast people from India was started by these morphed pictures from some right-wing Muslim groups in Pakistan. Likewise, there are certain right-wing Hindu groups based in India who are also doing it. Freedom of expression is fine, but how can you allow these people to carry out with this hate campaign?
Sanjoy, I want to pose that question to you. Sanjoy? Can you hear me?
Yeah. I think that the response has to be extremely robust from both government as well as communities, as much as media. If there is a hate campaign, there must be campaigns opposed to those campaigns, and I don't really see that. We have, and I think the other thing is the point that I made earlier is that many of these people probably for many years, although they may have stayed in Pune or Bangalore or whatever, because most of those who left were at were blue collar workers. They are not professionals at the high end or the middle end of incomes, and I think they felt probably a sense of not being a part of your larger society. And I think that it's very important for communities to build that relationship with other groups which are immigrants and come from a difficult, complex area as the Northeast.
Sadanand, how do you control a hate campaign and protect free speech?
I've said this before, I think sunlight is the best disinfectant. Now, even if you look at some of these Twitter handles that they tried to block, right? I don't follow all of them, but I think they should all be free. None of them were directly inciting violence. If someone says, go out and kill the Northeasterners or kill the Muslims or attack them, or anyone who incites violence, there are laws, the person should be arrested immediately. And the government of India, in fact, has been very bad at doing that. People go and politicians give all kinds of inflammatory speeches and no one says anything to them. So if someone incites violence, you should go after them. If someone wants to discuss something that you and I find unpleasant, they have the right to discuss it. The second point is that these handles that they tried to block, for example, most of them have maybe a few hundred or a few dozen followers. Some of them have a few thousand followers. Look at the mainstream journalists. They have hundreds of thousands of followers. Look at the government. It has hundreds of thousands. So if you want to counter it, in fact, social media gives, so to speak, the good guys, the mainstream responsible players, much greater tools to do this. So you don't have to look foolish and go after a few people on the fringe.
I want to pick up on that theme that you just brought up about sunlight. I have a comment here on our Facebook page from Esha Arora. He says, I think this is becoming a much broader issue of the government taking a preemptive stand before things like a mass riot demonstrations happen, like in Egypt. The source of these policies should be investigated, in my opinion. This cannot be the hallmark of the largest democracy in the world. So this goes to what you were saying earlier. I mean, India cannot go in the way of China or some other countries in the East, specifically in the Middle East, have gone.
Well, there are two reasons. There are two reasons why this can't happen, right? First of all, we've already seen evidence that when the government tries to do these bans, it's going to do it inefficiently. It's going to do it unfairly, right? That's the first problem. It's just a sort of and the second issue is that the technology itself is not something that is easy to ban without constructing an absolutely elaborate authoritarian police state-like structure like China. So you should not even be trying to go down that route. You should be trying to find alternative democratic ways of dealing with this.
All right, and on that note, we're going to call it a day. Thanks to all of our guests and our online community for your participation in the show today. Tomorrow, Wednesday, we look at the importance of Christianity in the U.S. presidential elections. Our team in Tampa will be coordinating a Google Hangout on the role of religion in U.S. politics. So tweet us your thoughts on that topic using the hashtag AJStream. And until then, we'll see you online.